So here's the thing about filling out forms while half asleep and 3 beers deep. You should probably read them first. Jake Torres learned this lesson approximately 47,000 light-years from home, standing in the main arena of Forge Prime Station, surrounded by what he could only describe as a science fiction convention's fever dream of alien blacksmiths. Contestant number 47. Human designation: Jake Torres, from the planet Earth. The station AI announced in a tone that suggested it had given up on life somewhere around contestant number 12. Please approach the registration podium. Jake shuffled forward, his worn jeans and faded New Mexico State t-shirt, making him look like someone who'd wandered into the wrong galaxy entirely. Which, to be fair, he basically had. Yeah, hi, quick question, Jake said, raising his hand like he was still in community college. I think there's been a mistake. I was supposed to be applying for a space mining job? The one with the decent dental plan? Bert here, the AI responded, and Jake could swear he heard a digital sigh. Basic engineering and recreational technician. At your service. Though service is a strong word for what I'm contractually obligated to provide. You filled out Form 773J, which is the application for the Galactic Metalworking Championship. Not 773K, which is indeed for the mining position. They're right next to each other in the database. This happens more than you'd think. How much more? You're the 5th human this cycle. The others figured it out before getting on the shuttle. Before Jake could properly process his poor life choices, a voice boomed across the arena like someone had given an avalanche a megaphone and an ego problem. So, the rumors are true. A human dares to enter the forge. Jake turned to see what he initially thought was a chandelier having a midlife crisis. Krennic the Unyielding stood 7 feet tall, with 4 crystalline arms that refracted light into annoying rainbows, and a face that looked like someone had carved arrogance itself into quartz. Behind him floated 47 championship medals, each one the size of a dinner plate, arranged in a halo that screamed, "I peaked in high school and never got over it." Hi? Jake offered, because apparently his survival instincts had stayed back on Earth. 47 consecutive victories, Krennic announced, gesturing to his floating trophy collection. 47 cycles of absolute dominance in the sacred art of metalworking. And now, a human, from a species that only discovered fire, 6,000 of your years ago? Closer to 1,000,000, actually, but I appreciate the confidence. Jake muttered. And do you know what we're competing for, little human? Krennic leaned in close enough that Jake could see his reflection in about 12 different facets. The winner's species gets to claim they invented metallurgy. It's the highest honor in the galactic artisan community. Jake blinked. That seems legally complicated. It's mostly symbolic, Bert chimed in helpfully. Mostly. There was that incident in Cycle 32 where the Vrelnoth tried to claim patent rights to all copper-based alloys. The lawsuits are still ongoing. This is insane, Jake said, looking around at the other contestants. There was a being made entirely of living metal, another that appeared to be a floating brain in a jar with robotic arms, and something that looked like an octopus had a baby with a welding torch. I don't even have my tools. My uncle has my tools. He's probably using them right now to make another decorative letter opener. Your uncle, Krennic repeated slowly, like he was tasting each word and finding them all disappointing. Makes decorative letter openers. Really nice ones, though. He's got an Etsy shop. 4.5 stars. Krennic's laugh started as a rumble and built into something that sounded like a rock tumbler full of condescension. Other contestants turned to look, which Jake suspected was exactly what Krennic wanted. The crystalline alien laughed for so long that Jake started checking his phone, remembered he had no signal, and then just stood there awkwardly. 92 seconds, Bert announced. New personal record for Krennic. His previous longest laugh was at a Glorbian who tried to forge a blade using interpretive dance. It was a valid cultural approach. Someone shouted from the back. It was not, Bert replied flatly. Krennic finally wound down, wiping a crystalline eye that may or may not have actually produced tears. Oh, this is perfect. This is absolutely perfect. The galaxy will speak of this for generations. The human who thought he could forge with the masters. He swept one arm dramatically toward the arena. Tell me, Jake Torres from Earth, what makes you think you can compete here? Jake thought about the form he'd filled out drunk. He thought about the shuttle ride he'd somehow already paid for. He thought about his student loans and his expired lease, and the text from his mom asking when he'd get a real job. And then he thought about Uncle Rico, who taught him to fold steel in a garage in Albuquerque, while drinking cheap beer and listening to Creedence Clearwater Revival. You know what? Jake said, surprising himself. Sure. Why not? I'm already here. Let's make some knives. Bert's voice carried a note of what might have been respect, or possibly just curiosity about how badly this could go. Well then, let the 48th Galactic Metalworking Championship begin. Contestants, prepare your materials. The challenge will be announced in 1 standard hour. Try not to die. It happens more than you'd think. Jake looked around at the assembled masters of metallurgy from across the galaxy, each one radiating confidence and technological superiority. He was so incredibly screwed. The preparation arena looked like someone had taken every forge in human history, made them futuristic, and then cranked the intimidation factor to 11. Workstations hummed with energy fields, plasma torches, and things that Jake was pretty sure violated at least 3 laws of physics. His workstation had a hammer and an anvil. "Bert, I think there's been another mistake," Jake said, staring at the almost offensively simple setup. "No mistake. The competition provides basic tools appropriate to each species' traditional methods." Apparently, Earth's metallurgical database entry was written by someone who watched a medieval fair once and called it research. That's actually pretty accurate, unfortunately. The other contestants were already displaying their Junbi materials. The living metal being was literally absorbing chunks of exotic alloys into its body. The brain in a jar had robots unpacking what looked like a particle accelerator. One contestant had brought a container labeled Stellar Core Fragment, handle with existential dread. Krennic's workstation was a monument to excess. 4 separate quantum forges, each one projecting holographic readouts that Jake couldn't even pretend to understand. The crystalline alien caught Jake staring and smiled, which on a crystal face looked deeply unsettling. "Intimidated, human? More confused about your energy bill, honestly." Before Krennic could respond, a massive holographic display materialized above the arena. Bert's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Contestants, your challenge is as follows. Forge a blade capable of cutting through a Titanax battle shield." The hologram showed a section of matte black material that looked like it could stop a meteor. For those unfamiliar, Titanax shields have protected the Vrelnath Empire for 3,000 cycles. They've withstood plasma cannons, molecular disruptors, and one memorable incident with a supernova shockwave. Your blades will be tested in 24 standard hours. Begin. The arena erupted into activity. Plasma, torches ignited, quantum forges hummed to life. Somewhere, someone was chanting in a language that made Jake's teeth itch. Jake stood very still, processing the fact that he was supposed to cut through super future armor with techniques his uncle learned from YouTube videos. "Okay," he said to himself. "Okay. Think, Torres. What would Uncle Rico do? Probably not enter an intergalactic metalworking competition." Bert offered. "Not helpful, Bert." Jake walked back to his assigned materials depot, where a small furry alien with approximately 8 tentacles was managing inventory. The alien looked up with enormous eyes that radiated anxiety like a space-age chihuahua. "Hi, human contestant? I'm Pip, Junior Materials Coordinator. Is there anything you need? I have your species' standard metallurgical materials ready. Iron, carbon, nickel, chromium. All very, basic?" The last word came out like an apology. "Basic is kind of my brand at this point," Jake said, looking over the materials. "Actually, this is perfect. Can I get about 10 pounds of high-carbon steel and maybe 5 pounds of nickel steel?" Pip's tentacles twitched with what might have been confusion. "You're going to mix them? Like, physically combine different metals through manual manipulation?" "Yeah, it's called pattern welding, or folding, depending on who you ask and how pretentious they're feeling. But why would you manually fold metals when you could use a molecular alignment matrix to achieve perfect crystalline structure?" Jake picked up a piece of steel, feeling its weight. "Because I don't have one of those, and also I have no idea what that is." Across the arena, Krennic had begun his work, and of course he'd started with a speech. "Behold," he announced to anyone within earshot, which due to his volume was everyone. "I shall forge a blade from stellar adamant, aligned at the quantum level, with an edge measured in picometers." "That's not even a practical edge. Thickness," someone muttered. "It's my impractical edge thickness," Krennic shot back. Jake started arranging his materials, laying out the different steels in alternating layers. Pip watched with the intensity of someone witnessing either a historic moment or a historic disaster. "So you're really just going to stack them and hit them with a hammer?" Pip asked. "Well, I'm going to heat them first. I'm not an animal. But forgive me, this is technology that's been obsolete in the galactic community for millennia. We have machines that can fold metal at the atomic level thousands of times per second." Jake started building a charcoal fire in the small forge provided. which felt deeply surreal given the fusion reactors blazing around him. Yeah, but here's the thing about machines, Pip. Machines are consistent. They do exactly what you tell them. But sometimes metal has ideas of its own. Sometimes you need to feel how it moves, how it responds to heat, how it wants to be shaped. Metal doesn't want things. It's not sentient. Tell that to my uncle's door hinges. Thanks. I have the sentient will be odor, when they're like 7, to have the trust every usian, in classed, they squeak in C-sharp out of spite. Pip's tentacles did a complicated gesture that might have been the alien equivalent of a shrug. I don't understand humans. That makes 2 of us, buddy. The fire was catching now, old-school charcoal starting to glow. Jake pumped the bellows, watching the heat build. Around him, the other contestants were deep in their work, each one using technology that would make a physicist weep with joy or confusion. And then there was Jake Torres from Albuquerque, heating metal the way people had done it for thousands of years, about to compete against beings who could manipulate matter at the quantum level. Krennic drifted over, drawn like a moth to the flame of potential mockery. Is that actual combustion-based heating? You're using chemical oxidation to generate thermal energy? I call it fire, but sure, we can use your words. This is adorable, Krennic said, his voice dripping with condescension thick enough to forge into its own blade. Truly. It's like watching a child play with building blocks while everyone else uses construction robots. Tell me. Do you also rub sticks together to make sparks? Tell me. Only on weekends, Jake replied, not looking up from his fire. Weekdays. I'm too busy not being a pompous chandelier. Several nearby contestants stopped working. Pip made a sound like a squeaky toy being stepped on. Krennic's crystalline face somehow managed to look offended. You dare. Yeah. I dare. Look, I'm already here, I'm already doing this, and honestly, your whole vibe is exhausting. So either watch and learn something, or go polish your metals. I'm sure at least one of them is getting dusty. For a long moment, Krennic just stared. Then he laughed again, but this time it was shorter. Sharper. Oh, I'm going to enjoy this. I'm going to enjoy watching you fail spectacularly, and then I'm going to display your primitive little knife in my trophy room as a curiosity. A reminder of the day a human thought he could forge with the stars. Cool story. Can you step back? You're blocking my light. Krennic turned and swept away, his metals chiming like wind chimes made of hubris. Pip sidled closer. That was either very brave or very stupid. Can't it be both? I suppose in your case it has to be. Pip paused. For what it's worth, I think your fire is pretty. Thanks, Pip. That might be the nicest thing anyone's said to me since I got here. Jake lifted his first piece of steel with tongs, checking the color of the metal in the firelight. Not quite ready. He pumped the bellows again, watching the coals glow brighter. 24 hours to make a blade that could cut through impossible armor using nothing but techniques his uncle had taught him between Netflix binges and barbecues. Hey Bert, Jake called out. What's the record for fastest elimination from this competition? 7 minutes. A Chlorthan tried to forge a blade using only positive thoughts. Did it work? What do you think? Right. Stupid question. Jake watched his steel heat up, the metal starting to glow orange. Let's see if I can at least beat 7 minutes. The steel hit the right temperature, that perfect orange-yellow that meant it was ready to move. Jake pulled it from the fire and raised his hammer. Well, he said to no one in particular, here goes everything. The hammer came down with a ring that sounded almost defiant in the arena full of humming technology, and Jake Torres began to forge. The thing about folding steel is that it's boring to watch until suddenly it isn't. For the first 6 hours, Jake was just some guy hitting hot metal with a hammer while everyone else's workstations looked like a rave at a physics convention. So you heat it, you hammer it flat, you fold it, and repeat. Pip had fully abandoned any pretense of doing actual work and was now perched on a storage container, all 8 tentacles wrapped around what appeared to be alien popcorn. Yep, over and over. Each fold doubles the layers. Do it enough times and you get thousands of layers of different steels all bonded together. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead. It's called Damascus steel. Well, technically this is pattern-welded steel. Real Damascus steel was made in India and the recipe got lost, but my uncle Rico watched a bunch of videos and figured it out pretty close. Your uncle sounds like a very educated craftsman. My uncle got kicked out of a community college for trying to brew beer in the chemistry lab. But he's great with his hands. Krennic's voice cut through the arena like nails on a chalkboard made of smugness. How goes the primitive metalworking, human? Discovered fire's hotter cousin yet? Jake didn't even look up. You know what's funny? You've been talking for 6 hours and you're only on stage 2 of whatever you're doing. I'm already on fold 15. Fold 15, Krennic repeated, his voice flat. You've manually folded metal 15 times. I've quantum-aligned 7 billion molecules into a perfect matrix. Cool. Which one of us is having more fun? Krennic made a sound like grinding glass. This isn't about fun. This is about perfection. About pushing the boundaries of what's possible with metallurgy. Dude, you're sucking all the joy out of making knives. That's actually impressive in its own terrible way. Several other contestants had started drifting over during their cooling cycles or calibration periods. The brain in a jar floated closer, its robotic arms still twitching with residual energy. Question for the human, the brain said in a voice that sounded like Stephen Hawking's computer had gained the ability to be condescending. Why are you using such an inefficient method? The thermodynamic losses alone must be catastrophic. Jake pulled his steel from the fire, examining the color. Because efficient isn't always better. See, when you fold steel like this, you're creating these layers with different carbon content. High carbon for hardness, low carbon for flexibility. The blade gets hard enough to hold an edge but flexible enough not to shatter. But we can simulate that with computational modeling and achieve the same result in minutes. Can you though? Jake started hammering, the rhythm steady and practiced. Because simulations assume perfect conditions. But metal isn't perfect. It's got impurities, grain structures, weird quirks. Sometimes you need to just feel how it's responding. Pip's tentacles wiggled excitedly. Wait, so you're saying there's an intuitive element to this? Like art? More like jazz. You know the rules, but then you improvise based on what the metal's telling you. Metal doesn't tell you things, Krennic insisted, but he'd stopped working on his own project and was watching now, which Jake counted as a small victory. Sure it does. See this color? Jake held up the glowing steel. That's not just red. That's cherry red. Which means it's around 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit. Too hot and the carbon burns out. Too cold and it won't weld to itself when I fold it. The metal's literally telling me when it's ready. That's just thermodynamics. The brain in a jar said, yeah, but I'm doing thermodynamics by vibes, which is way more fun. By hour 12, Jake had a crowd. It started with Pip and grew to include nearly a third of the contestants, all watching this human do metalworking like their ancestors might have done it, assuming their ancestors had hands and weren't energy beings or sentient clouds. Fold 28, Jake announced, plunging the steel into oil for quenching. The liquid erupted into flames, because apparently alien oil was spicy. That's 268 million layers, for anyone counting. I was counting, Pip said, making notes on a datapad. This is actually fascinating. The pattern emerging on the surface, is that from the different layers? Yep, that's why they call it pattern welded. When you etch it with acid later, the different steels react differently, and you get these waves and swirls. Krennic pushed through the crowd, his crystalline face somehow managing to look annoyed despite having no actual facial muscles. This is absurd. You're all watching him do basic metallurgy like it's some sort of revelation. It kind of is though, said one of the contestants, a gaseous being contained in a force field. I've been using nanoforges for 60 cycles. I'd forgotten metal could even be worked by hand. That's because hand working is obsolete, Krennic said, his voice rising. We have technology, we have precision. We have computational power that can calculate the exact. Yeah, but can you make it look cool while doing it? Jake interrupted, pulling the blade from the oil, flame still licking along its surface. Because not gonna lie, the whole quantum forge thing looks like a screensaver got sentient and angry. The gaseous being made a sound that might have been a laugh. Several others joined in. Krennic's glow intensified, which Jake was learning meant he was angry. Fine. Fine. Continue your little performance art. We'll see how primitive technique fares against true mastery when the testing begins. He stormed back to his workstation, his metals clinking aggressively. You really like making him mad, don't you? Pip observed. It's not on purpose. I think I just have a face that annoys people. My high school guidance counselor said the same thing. Jake examined his blade blank, checking for cracks or flaws. The steel had a subtle pattern already visible, waves of lighter and darker metal flowing along its length. It wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. He still needed to grind the edge, shape the profile, do the final heat treatment, sharpen it to something that could actually cut. But for the first time since arriving at Forge Prime, Jake felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't completely out of his depth. Okay, he said, reaching for his grinder. Let's make this thing actually blade-shaped. Do you really think it'll cut through a Titanax shield? Pip asked quietly. Jake thought about Uncle Rico's kitchen knives that were still sharp after 15 years. He thought about the axe head that had survived 3 camping trips, and an incident with a tree stump that definitely wasn't supposed to be cut. He thought about the fact that humans had been folding steel for over 1,000 years because it actually, genuinely worked. Honestly? No idea. But it's gonna look fantastic while trying. Bert's voice echoed through the arena. 12 hours remaining, contestants. Please ensure your projects don't achieve sentience. We're still dealing with the paperwork from Cycle 37. Jake grinned and got back to work. The sound of his grinding wheel a strange counterpoint to all the humming quantum technology around him. Sometimes the old ways were old for a reason. Sometimes that reason was because they actually worked. Hour 14 was when things got weird, which Jake realized was saying something given his current situation involved being 47,000 light-years from home making a knife for space aliens. "Bert, why is my blade glowing blue?" Jake asked, holding up the steel he'd just pulled from the quench tank. "That's the alien atmosphere reacting with your primitive Earth materials. Totally safe. Probably." Probably? 63% certainty. Would you like me to round up to make you feel better? You know what? I'm good. Jake examined the blade, which had stopped glowing and now looked completely normal except for the subtle rippling pattern emerging along its surface. The Damascus pattern was coming through beautifully, waves of light and dark steel flowing like water frozen in metal. Pip had given up entirely on doing actual work and was now essentially Jake's assistant, fetching tools and materials while peppering him with questions that ranged from genuinely insightful to completely unhinged. So if you fold it 28 times, why not fold it 50 times? Wouldn't more layers be better? Diminishing returns. After a certain point, you're just making the layers so thin they don't matter anymore. Plus my arms would fall off. Jake started working on the blade's profile, carefully grinding away excess material to create the edge geometry. Uncle Rico tried folding 1 to 40 times once. Took him 3 months, and the blade wasn't noticeably better. Your uncle sounds persistent. My uncle has undiagnosed ADHD and access to power tools. It's a dangerous combination. Across the arena, Krennic was entering what Jake could only describe as his dramatic finale phase. All 4 arms were moving in synchronized patterns, manipulating holographic controls while his quantum forges hummed at frequencies that made Jake's fillings hurt. "Behold, the final alignment," Krennic announced, because of course he did. "Witness as I bind the very forces of stellar fusion into a cutting edge that will redefine sharpness itself." Is he always like this? Jake asked the gaseous contestant who drifted over to watch. Only during competitions. Last cycle he gave a 40-minute monologue about molecular bonds. Security had to sedate 3 audience members. That tracks. Jake focused on his work, drawing the blade along the grinding belt in smooth, controlled passes. Sparks flew in tiny cascades that looked almost magical in the weird lighting of the forge arena. This was the part where you could ruin everything if you overheated the steel or ground through into the softer core layer. "You're very quiet when you work," Pip observed. "The others talk constantly about what they're doing." "Yeah, well, I'm trying not to screw this up. Plus, I'm mostly thinking about whether I turned off my stove before I left Earth." "Did you?" "No idea. It's been bothering me for 3 days." Hour 18 brought the heat treatment phase, which was arguably the most important part of the whole process, and also the part where Jake was most likely to catastrophically fail in front of an intergalactic audience. "Okay, so I need to heat this to exactly 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Hold it there for exactly 10 minutes, then quench it in oil at a specific speed," Jake explained to Pip, who was taking notes like this was going to be on a test. "Too hot and the steel gets brittle. Too cold and it stays soft. Too fast on the quench and it cracks. Too slow and it doesn't harden properly." That seems like a lot of variables. "Yeah, it's almost like metalworking is complicated or something." Jake slid the blade into the forge, watching the color change as the temperature climbed. The crazy thing is, people figured all this out through trial and error over thousands of years. No computers, no temperature probes, just a lot of watching metal change color and remembering what worked. "That's actually incredible," Pip said softly. "We've become so dependent on computational modeling that we've forgotten what it's like to just experiment and learn." "Don't tell Krennic that. He'll quantum align your molecules out of spite." The blade reached temperature, that perfect orange-yellow glow that meant the crystal structure was ready to transform. Jake counted to 600 in his head, keeping the temperature steady by adjusting the airflow, then pulled the blade out and plunged it into the oil in one smooth motion. The quench tank erupted like he'd just thrown a meteor into it. Flames shot up, alien oil hissed and popped, and somewhere an alarm started beeping before Bert shut it off. That was metal, the gaseous being said appreciatively. It literally was. Yes, Jake replied, waiting for the violence to subside before pulling the blade out. It emerged dark and slightly warped, which was normal. Okay. Now the stress relief tempering, which is basically just putting it in an oven at 400 degrees for a few hours to keep it from being so angry. Your descriptions of metallurgical processes are deeply unscientific, the brain in a jar observed. And yet you're all still watching. By hour 22, Jake was exhausted, caffeinated beyond human limits thanks to whatever Pip had given him that tasted like battery acid and regret. And putting the final edge on his blade. The other contestants were in similar states of controlled chaos, making last-minute adjustments and preparations. Krennic's blade sat in a stasis field, glowing with an inner light that was probably compensating for something. It was beautiful in an intimidating, this could probably cut through space-time itself kind of way. Jake's blade was simpler. No glow. No fancy effects. Just steel with a pattern that looked like waves on a beach, an edge he could shave with if he was feeling brave and stupid, and the knowledge that Uncle Rico would either be proud or confused about why Jake was in space. It's done, Jake said, setting down his sharpening stone. I mean, I could keep messing with it, but at this point I'm just as likely to make it worse. Pip's tentacles did an excited dance. It's beautiful. The pattern is so intricate. Yeah, that's the layers showing through. And each wave is hundreds of layers of different steels all working together. Jake held it up to the light, watching the pattern shift and flow. You know what's funny? This blade is basically the same as what my uncle makes for selling to dentists who want fancy kitchen knives. I'm competing against quantum forges and stellar fusion with something that a guy in New Mexico makes while listening to podcasts about Bigfoot. Does your uncle believe in Bigfoot? He's keeping an open mind, which I think means yes, but he doesn't want to admit it. Bert's voice boomed across the arena. 2 hours remaining. Finalize your projects and prepare for testing. Any contestants whose blades have achieved sentience, please report to the safety station for immediate containment. Has that actually happened? Jake asked. Cycle 19. The blade tried to run for political office. It got 12% of the vote. Jake looked at his Damascus blade, simple and ancient, and somehow finished despite all odds. Around him, the other contestants were doing final checks on creations that bent physics and challenged reality itself. And somewhere, Uncle Rico was probably in his garage in Albuquerque, making another knife while watching YouTube videos, completely unaware that his nephew was about to test his techniques against the best metalworkers in the galaxy. Hey Pip, Jake said. What are the odds I don't completely embarrass myself and my entire species in the next 2 hours? Pip's tentacles wiggled in what might have been encouragement or possibly an anxiety seizure. I'm going to give you the same percentage Bert gave you earlier about the safety of your materials. 63%? I was thinking more like 50-50, but I didn't want to discourage you. Appreciate the honesty. Jake stood up, his back cracking from 22 hours of work. Well, let's go see if Damascus steel can cut through impossible armor. What's the worst that could happen? Your blade could shatter. You could be humiliated in front of representatives from 10,000 species, and humanity's reputation in the galactic community could be forever tarnished. Pip offered helpfully. Yeah, okay, I walked into that one. Bert chimed in. Testing begins in 1 hour. Contestants, please proceed to the demonstration arena. Try to look confident even if you're not. The audience feeds on fear and I find it entertaining. Jake picked up his blade, feeling its weight, its balance, the slight texture of the pattern under his thumb. It was just a knife, a really nice knife, made the way people had made them for over 1,000 years. But it was his knife. All right, Jake said to no one in particular. Let's go cut some impossible stuff. The demonstration arena was less arena and more amphitheater, designed by someone who really wanted you to know failure was an option. Tiered seating surrounded a central platform where a section of Titanax battle shield sat mounted on a testing frame, looking like it could stop a meteor and then judge you for trying. The audience was packed. Apparently word had spread about the human doing primitive metallurgy, and now half the station had shown up to watch him either succeed or fail spectacularly. No pressure, Jake muttered, gripping his Damascus blade. Actually, the atmospheric pressure here is slightly higher than Earth standard, Pip said helpfully. So technically, more pressure. Pip, buddy, we need to work on your emotional support skills. Bert's voice echoed through the arena. Welcome to the testing phase of the 48th Galactic Metalworking Championship. Contestants will attempt to cut through a Titanax battle shield, the same material that's protected the Vrelnath Empire for 3 millennia. Spoiler alert, Most of you will fail. Please fail entertainingly. The first few contestants went quickly. The living metal being's blade sliced through the shield. Beautifully, but then dissolved, because apparently it couldn't maintain cohesion after the cut. The brain in a jar's molecularly aligned edge worked perfectly but shattered into 17 pieces upon contact, which Bert announced with obvious glee. "See, this is what I'm talking about," Jake whispered to Pip. "All that technology and they're breaking on impact." "Your blade could also break on impact," Pip pointed out. "Yes, but I'll be less surprised about it." More contestants went. Some succeeded in cutting through but with caveats. Blades that melted afterward, edges that destabilized. One memorable incident where the blade successfully cut through the shield, but then phased into another dimension and couldn't be retrieved. Then came Krennic. Of course, Krennic had reserved the slot right before Jake. Maximum dramatic impact. "Behold," Krennic announced, his four arms holding his glowing quantum-forged blade aloft like Excalibur's pretentious cousin. The culmination of 47 championship cycles of experience, combined with technology that literally manipulates space-time at the Planck scale. "Does he ever just do things without a speech?" Jake asked. "No," said approximately 12 audience members simultaneously. Krennic approached the Titanax shield with the confidence of someone who'd never failed at anything, which Jake was learning was a very specific type of confidence that made you want to see someone fail at something. The blade touched the shield. There was a sound like reality unzipping itself. Krennic's blade cut through the Titanax shield like, to use his exact words, butter through butter. If the butter was made of impossible materials and the knife was forged from the dreams of stars themselves. "He's really committed to the metaphor," Pip observed. The cut was perfect. Flawless. The blade remained intact, still glowing, still looking like it could cut through the fundamental forces of the universe if it felt like it. The audience erupted. In applause. Krennic bowed, his metals chiming like wind chimes made of ego. "And now," Bert announced, with what Jake swore was amusement. "Our final contestant, Jake Torres. From Earth. Species known for reality television, arguing on the internet, and apparently thinking they can forge with the masters." "That's just mean," Jake said. "Thank you," Bert replied. Jake walked to the platform, his Damascus blade feeling suddenly very simple and very human in his hand. The shield section in front of him was unmarked except for Krennic's perfect cut. The material looked impossibly dense, like someone had compressed darkness itself into armor. "Any words before you attempt the impossible?" Krennic asked, his voice dripping with mock encouragement. Jake looked at his blade, at the pattern flowing along its surface. At the edge he'd spent hours perfecting. He thought about Uncle Rico in his garage, making knives between beer and bad decisions. He thought about 1,000 years of humans figuring out metallurgy through trial and error and sheer stubbornness. "Yeah," Jake said. "Damascus. My uncle makes them on weekends." He raised the blade and brought it down in a smooth, controlled cut. The Damascus steel met the Titanax shield with a sound like a bell being struck in a cathedral. For a moment, Jake felt resistance, the shield pushing back against the edge. Then something shifted. The blade found its path, the thousands of layers of hard and soft steel working together, flexing and cutting simultaneously. The blade passed through the shield, clean, smooth, complete. Jake lifted the blade, examining it in the arena lights. Not a chip, not a crack, not a single sign of damage. The edge was still sharp enough to shave with if he was feeling stupid and brave, which at this point he absolutely was. The arena was silent. "Bert," Krennic said slowly. "Analysis. Running diagnostics now," Bert replied, and Jake could swear the AI sounded impressed. "Contestant Krennic's blade. Successful cut. Blade integrity maintained. Quantum alignment still stable. Contestant Torres's blade. Successful cut. Blade integrity maintained. And here's where it gets interesting. The edge geometry is actually sharper post-cut than pre-cut." "That's impossible," Krennic said. "And yet," Bert continued, "due to the layered structure and differential hardness, the blade self-sharpened during the cut as softer layers wore slightly faster than hard layers, exposing fresh hard steel. Additionally, while Krennic's blade succeeded, its quantum alignment is decaying. Projected time until destabilization, 4 hours. Torres's blade shows 0 decay, 0 degradation, and could theoretically make that cut repeatedly." The silence got louder somehow. Pip's tentacles were vibrating with excitement. "Do you understand what this means? Your blade is the only one that remains fully functional after testing." "I genuinely did not expect that," Jake admitted. Krennic's crystalline face did something complicated. This is absurd. You're telling me that folded steel, manually folded steel, is functionally superior to quantum-aligned stellar adamant? Not superior, Jake said, because he wasn't completely suicidal. Just different. Your blade is sharper, probably harder, definitely more impressive looking. But mine is, what's the word? Resilient. Pip supplied. Robust. Practical. Yeah, those words. See, the thing about Damascus steel is it's not trying to be perfect. The layers have different properties. Some are hard and brittle, some are soft and tough. They work together. When stress hits, the soft layers absorb shock while the hard layers maintain the edge. It's not about being the absolute best at one thing. It's about being good enough at everything. The brain in a jar floated forward. You're describing a composite material with self-optimizing properties achieved through purely mechanical means rather than computational design. Sure, if that makes you feel better about it. But how? Krennic demanded. How did humans discover this without computational modeling, without quantum analysis, without any of the tools we use? Jake shrugged. We hit metal with hammers for like 3,000 years, and paid attention to what worked. Then we taught our kids, who taught their kids, and eventually my Uncle Rico taught me while we were supposed to be watching the Super Bowl. This is insane, Krennic said, but his voice had lost its edge. He sounded more confused than angry now. You achieved advanced metallurgy through iterative trial and error? Just making knives and seeing what happened? Also, swords. And axes. And one time a cannon that exploded, but we learned from that too. Bert's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. By the rules of the competition, both contestant Krennic and contestant Torres successfully completed the challenge. However, the tiebreaker clause states that in the event of multiple successful completions, victory goes to the blade, demonstrating the greatest long-term functionality and durability. No. Krennic said quietly. Contestant Torres wins the 48th Galactic Metalworking Championship. The arena exploded into chaos. Half the audience was cheering, the other half was arguing about the ruling. And Krennic looked like someone had just explained that his entire career was based on a clerical error. Jake stood there, holding his uncle's Damascus steel technique in his hand, feeling like he'd just accidentally won an argument he didn't know he was having. I don't suppose I can decline this? He asked Pip quietly. Absolutely not, Pip said, all 8 tentacles vibrating with excitement. Do you understand what you've done? You've proven that intuitive, experiential metalworking can compete with our most advanced technology. I proved my uncle is really good at making knives. Same thing. Krennic approached slowly, his crystalline form somehow looking dimmer. I demand a rematch. This is clearly a fluke. Some property of Earth metals we don't understand. Some trick. It's not a trick, Jake said, genuinely feeling bad now. Look, your blade is amazing. It's sharper, it's prettier, it probably costs more than my car, but Damascus steel has been working for over 1,000 years because it's designed to be practical, not perfect. Just good enough to do the job and keep doing it. Good enough, Krennic repeated. Like the words tasted wrong. I've spent 47 cycles perfecting my craft, pursuing ultimate sharpness, absolute hardness, theoretical perfection, and you're telling me good enough is better? Not better. Just different. And maybe sometimes different is what you need. Jake held out his blade. Want to look at it? The pattern's really cool up close. Krennic stared at the offered blade for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out with one crystalline hand and took it, examining the flowing Damascus pattern in the light. It is beautiful, he admitted quietly. Chaotic, but beautiful. Each blade would be unique. Yeah, that's kind of the point. No two come out exactly the same. I don't understand humans, Krennic said, which seemed to be a running theme. Join the club, Jake replied. We have t-shirts. They're all slightly different sizes, even when you order the same one. Bert's voice boomed. Will contestant Torres please approach the podium to claim his prize and make a speech that will hopefully be shorter than Krennic's usual monologues? Jake walked to the podium in a daze, accepting a trophy that looked like a twisted piece of metal that was either abstract art or a cry for help. He couldn't tell which. So, Bert prompted, would you like to claim that humanity invented metallurgy? Jake looked at the trophy, at his blade, at the audience of 10,000 species, all watching him. He thought about Uncle Rico in his garage. About 3,000 years of human blacksmiths, all teaching each other through trial and error. Nah, Jake said into the microphone. We definitely didn't invent it. We just got really stubborn about figuring it out. The trophy presentation devolved into what Jake could only describe as academic chaos. Researchers from a dozen species surrounded him, asking increasingly technical questions about grain structure and carbon diffusion, while Jake tried to explain that he mostly just did what Uncle Rico told him and didn't ask too many questions. But the thermodynamic efficiency, one researcher insisted, a floating squid thing with too many degrees. How do you calculate the optimal fold count without computational modeling? You do it until your arms hurt, then you do it like 3 more times. That's not a methodology. And yet here we are. Krennic had retreated to his workstation, sitting alone among his quantum forges like a kid whose science project got honorable mention. Jake felt genuinely bad, which was weird considering the guy had spent the entire competition being aggressively pompous. "Hey," Jake said, walking over. "For what it's worth, your blade was objectively better at almost everything." "Almost everything, except the one thing that mattered," Krennic replied, not looking up. "Durability, practical function, the ability to remain effective after use. All things I dismissed as primitive concerns. They're not primitive. They're just different priorities." Krennic's crystalline fingers traced patterns on his workbench. "I've spent 47 cycles perfecting theoretical ideals. You spent 24 hours making something practical, and 1. He finally looked up. "Your species is deeply irritating." "Yeah, we get that a lot." That wasn't an insult. Well, it was, but also an observation. Krennic stood, his full height making Jake feel like he was talking to an angry lamp. "You said your uncle makes these on weekends?" "Yeah, he's got like an Etsy shop." "Forged by Rico. 4.5 stars. "Why only 4.5? "Someone. Forged by Rico. 4. Complained that their knife arrived too sharp, left a bad review because they cut themselves opening the box." Krennic made a sound that might have been a laugh or possibly crystalline grinding. "That's the most human thing I've ever heard." He paused. "Would your uncle be willing to teach his technique?" Jake blinked. "You want to learn from my uncle? The guy who got kicked out of community college? I want to understand how you achieved results that my quantum forges couldn't. That requires setting aside my pride, which is apparently something I need to work on." Krennic's metals chimed softly. "Also, if I'm being honest, I haven't actually enjoyed metalworking in about 20 cycles. It became about winning rather than creating. Your obvious enjoyment of the process was deeply annoying but also refreshing." "Huh, yeah, okay, I can send you his contact info. Fair warning, he'll probably try to talk to you about Bigfoot." "I don't know what that is." "Keep it that way. Trust me." Pip rushed over, all 8 tentacles waving frantically. "Jake! You have 47,000 orders for Earth Damascus steel blades." "I have what now?" The competition was broadcast across 10,000 systems. "Everyone wants impossible Earth steel now." Pip's voice climbed into registers Jake didn't think were possible. "The economic implications alone." "Okay, slow down. I can't make 47,000 knives. I have a day job. Well, I had a day job. I missed like a week of work for this. I'm probably fired." Bert's voice cut in from overhead. "Actually, checking your employment status. You were fired 3 days ago, for unauthorized absence. However, you're currently trending on 17,000 social media platforms across the galaxy as that human who won with primitive technology. Several universities want to offer you research positions. Also, the Vrelnath Empire wants to commission 1,000 Damascus blades for their honor guard." "The Vrelnath," Krennic said, slowly. "The species whose shields we were cutting through wants your blades?" "Apparently they appreciate irony," Bert replied. "Or they're really mad about the shield thing and want to study your technique. 50-50 odds on either." Jake's phone, which he'd forgotten he was still carrying, suddenly started buzzing with notifications as it apparently connected to whatever passed for intergalactic Wi-Fi. The messages were rolling in so fast the screen just became a blur. One message stood out, sent from a New Mexico area code. "Saw you on Space TV. Proud of you, mijo. You owe me a beer. And also, can you send me some of that alien steel?" "Looks like fun." Uncle Rico, Jake laughed, the sound echoing weirdly in the arena. "My uncle wants alien steel samples." "Absolutely not," 3 different safety officials said simultaneously. "Fair." The gaseous being from earlier drifted over. "I have to ask, did you actually think you could win when you started?" Jake looked at his Damascus blade. Still sharp, still functional, still just a knife made using techniques older than most of the technology on the station. "Honestly, I just wanted to not embarrass myself too badly. Winning wasn't even on my radar." "The most human victory possible," Krennic observed. "Succeeding accidentally through stubbornness and refusing to acknowledge impossibility." That's going on our tourism brochures, Jake said. Bert chimed in. Speaking of which, Earth's application to join the Galactic Trade Federation has been fast-tracked. Apparently, your victory proved that humanity has valuable alternative technological perspectives. Congratulations, your species is now officially space-worthy. Wait, we weren't before. You were on the waiting list behind a species of sentient moss, but the moss couldn't pass the metallurgy requirements, so here we are. Pip was still vibrating with excitement. This is incredible. Do you understand what you've done? You've opened trade routes, proved alternative methodologies, won the championship, and made Krennic experience personal growth. I wouldn't go that far, Krennic muttered. But he was smiling slightly, which on a crystalline face looked weird but genuine. Jake looked around at the crowd of aliens, at Pip's enthusiastic tentacles, at Krennic's quantum forges sitting idle, at his own simple Damascus blade that had somehow done the impossible. You know what the really crazy part is? Jake said. I still have no idea if I turned off my stove. We can check your home security system, Bert offered. Wait, you don't have a home security system. You have a plant and a note that says please don't steal stuff. In my defense, it worked until now. The stove is off, Bert continued. But your plant is dead, sorry. Damn it, I liked that plant. The arena was beginning to clear, contestants packing up their equipment and materials. Krennic carefully boxed his quantum forges, moving with less dramatic flair than before. The brain in a jar was arguing with someone about computational limitations. The living metal being was already posting a review of the competition on what Jake assumed was Space Yelp. So what now? Pip asked. You're a champion. You could stay here, teach, research, join the Galactic Metalworking Council. I'm gonna go home, Jake said. Drink a beer with my uncle. Maybe make some more knives without the pressure of 10,000 species watching. Eventually figure out what to do with 47,000 orders. That seems anticlimactic. Yeah, well, I'm human. We're really good at doing something amazing and then immediately wanting a nap. Jake gathered his tools, packed his Damascus blade carefully in a case that Pip insisted he take as a gift. As he headed toward the exit, Krennic called out. Torres! Jake turned. Next cycle, Krennic said, his metals catching the light. I'm entering again, and I'm going to learn your technique and combine it with quantum forging. That sounds either amazing or like a safety hazard. Both, probably. But that's the point, isn't it? Pushing boundaries while respecting tradition? Look at you, having character development. It's deeply uncomfortable. I don't recommend it. Jake laughed and headed for the shuttle bay, where Bert informed him that his return trip had been upgraded to first class, which apparently meant the seat vibrated at frequencies that didn't cause nausea. As the station fell away behind him, Jake pulled out his phone and typed a message to Uncle Rico. Made a knife. Won a space competition. Accidentally got Earth into the Galactic Federation. Want to collaborate on an intergalactic Etsy shop? The response came back almost immediately. Hell yeah, but you're handling shipping. Also bringing beer when you get home. The good stuff, not that space beer. Also, seriously, what does alien steel look like? Jake smiled and settled back in his seat, his Damascus blade resting across his lap. Still sharp, still functional, still just a really good knife, made using techniques humans had perfected through sheer stubbornness over 1,000 years. Sometimes the old ways were old because they'd been replaced by something better, and sometimes they were old because they'd never needed replacing in the first place. Somewhere in the cargo bay, packed carefully among his belongings, was the trophy for the 48th Galactic Metalworking Championship. Jake was definitely using it as a bottle opener. Uncle Rico would appreciate that.